Hey everybody, Chairman here with another deck profile. I'm really excited about this deck profile, but this is also going to be a very bittersweet deck profile for me because this is going to mark the end of my BCS24-25 season. So I will be profiling the deck that I took to most of my deck BCS tournaments, which was Vancouver and Chicago, after the top 16 performance at Houston. And this deck is really cool, and I worked on it very hard. I lapped out a lot of stuff for the deck, and I really wanted to do well with the deck because that would have been a really exciting thing for this kind of deck, and it would just really have validated a lot of like the hard work and the ingenuity that I put into this deck. But sadly, it did not pan out for a variety of reasons that we can kind of go over into the deck profile. But first, what am I even talking about? Well, I'm talking about Macross Delta. So this is the deck I took. And specifically, I am talking about 8-choice Macross Delta. So let's talk about the climax lineup first. And this climax lineup is going to be 8 of Ikenai Borderline, which is the level 2 Mikumo and level 3 Freya combo, and 8 copies of, or sorry, not 8 copies, 4 copies of Ikenai Borderline and 4 copies of Axia, Love and Hate. I say 8 because, well, you'll see in a very short moment. So you can see this is pretty straightforward. We're playing a level 1 combo in Axia, Love and Hate, and then a level 2 and a level 3 combo in Ikenai Borderline. The climax lineup seems, you know, pretty stock standard. And to go with the climaxes, we are also running you know, a very standard suite of the climax combos. Pretty normal, right? 4 copies of the Kaname level 1 to go with the Axia, 3 copies of the Mikumo level 2. You don't really want to see like 4 of this. 2 or 3 is probably fine. I think 3 is really good in this deck specifically. And then obviously 4 copies of the Freya level 3, which is going to be your finisher. It's a Mocha 3 for your opponent, so pretty good even into something like very compressed deck state. So this, you know, so far is pretty standard, okay? So far this deck seems like, well, you know, nothing too spicy. You're not really cooking quite yet. You know, we'll put our climax combos. Let's put our climax combos next to our climaxes. I think this will make sense in a bit. But what I'm also running is I'm also running 4 copies of Fly Walkure, which is the event that when you play 2 of them and send them to memory, all your climaxes in the waiting room get the names of all other climaxes in the waiting room. Now, usually when you're playing Fly Walkure, you're playing it with, you know, 6 different climaxes, right? All the climaxes with the Super Dimensional Venus Link. You're playing it with like the standby, the one of door, the other one of door, the one of alive, and then you're playing 2 of each Ikenai Borderline and Axia. And you play it with the Rain of Brainstorm so that when you use the Super Brainstorm effect, you mill out your entire deck, and then you hope to God that there are 4 climax names at least in your waiting room, in which case you get to do the free fresh at the end of the turn. And it makes your Fly Walkure events turn on so that any climax you play becomes any other climax in your waiting room. Obviously, we are playing 4/4 of climaxes, so if we were to run the Rain of Brainstorm, we would just be killing ourselves, so we're not doing that. The way this deck is designed to work is that if you're running 4/4 of the climaxes, it's pretty easy to know which climax is in your hand and which climax is in your waiting room, right? Like you either have an Axia in hand, or an Ikenai Borderline in waiting room, or you have an Ikenai Borderline in hand and an Axia in waiting room, right? Or you don't have either, in which case you just have one, but then you know which climax you have because it's just the one that you're playing from hand. And so, in this case, your Fly Walkure just becomes a glorified climax swap, but also you just get to activate the level 1 Kaname into your level 2 Mikumo combo. Because the way the 6 climax deck gets its advantages back is by doing this, the Kaname into the Mikumo with the Axia and Forbidden Borderline. That's why they run these climaxes at 2 copies each, because it's the most important 2 climaxes. So you can do the 1-0 and the 2-0, and then 2-0 get you back all your cards, and then 1 extra turn of that, and you're basically, you know, net neutral from the -2 from the Fly Walkure event. So I figured, like, why don't we just do that? Like, we can just do it without playing all the other combos. Because, like, if you think about it, the standby and the 2 doors, they don't climax combo with anything. Like, you're just running them for names, right? And then the alive, if you're running, like, the Hayate Freya finisher, you know, the alive does combo with that. But we have a perfectly serviceable finisher in the Freya. Like, this Mocha finisher is fine. Like, we, you know, on the Trusted Collectibles channel, this was part of our deck profile. Like, we opted to go for this finisher because this finisher is perfectly serviceable, and by having this as our finisher, we are more consistently able to find the right climax for the finisher, right? Because it's 2 copies of Ikenai Borderline. And so, like, we can do all of this without the Reign of Brainstorm, and we can take full advantage of kind of the strengths of the 6 climax deck without having to play a Brainstorm that is kind of bad, and also having to fill our deck with cards to fix our, like, climax issues and stuff like that. And so this was kind of the thesis that I brought to the table for Macross, is that what if we just built a deck that took full advantage of the entire Walkure, Fire Walkure package, but instead of, you know, playing the Brainstorm, we just play a normal game of Weiss. And it turns out this deck is actually really good. So just this shell, like here, is actually very good. I think it's really, really consistent. One thing that's really special about this package is that your early game feels so much better than in the other deck. So let me explain. So in the other deck, you really want to, like, hit your level 1 turn with at least 3 stock, if not 4 stock, because you need to play both Fly Walkure events, and then you need to use the Brainstorm effect. If you don't use the Brainstorm effect, you're not going to have the climax names available for you to use this combo, right? So you need at least 3 stock, which is 2 events and the Brainstorm, to even get off the ground. So, like, sometimes if you hit level 1, you don't have 3 stock, you're going to spend a turn doing nothing. You're going to be playing zeros, and you're going to be building stock. You're not going to be able to play a climax combo or do anything, right? In this deck, you only need 2 stock. You just need to play the 2 events, and then because we're just trying to get 1 climax name, it's pretty easy to guarantee that we have the right names in the waiting room. So we don't have to really mill that much. Like, we have a lot of tools in the deck that can just mill naturally, and then, you know, once we can just discard the climaxes, you know, for, like, early game Mulligan, and then we have the right names, right? So that part's pretty easy. The second thing that's really good about this deck, is that, like, in the other deck, right, if you don't have enough stock and you don't have the setup combo, you basically don't even want to play a climax, because your climaxes aren't going to plus you unless you have the right climax to play, in which case, like, good for you, you got the right climax, right? But it's like, generally speaking, you're not going to always have the right climax at level 1 to play, and so at level 1 you're just probably not doing anything. But in this deck, both of our climaxes are live at level 1. If we play the Miku, if we have 2 or less climaxes in the waiting room, we can early play the Mikumo from hand at level 1, and then if we have Ikenai Borderline in hand, we can just go for the Mikumo combo. And vice versa, if we have the Kaname in hand and the Kaname in the waiting room, and we have the Axia in hand, we can just go for the Kaname, have the combo. We don't need to pivot to the other, like, we don't need the event to just combo off. Any climax that we have early game in our hand, along with any of the related climax combos, is totally live at level 1. And so a lot of games, I will go into level 1 with 2 or less climaxes in the waiting room, I will play a Mikumo, and I would just do a single Mikumo plus some zeros and combo with the Ikenai Borderline, and then next turn I set up double event Kaname, we go from there. And other times I'll use the Kaname combo, summon out another Kaname, summon out like a utility 0, and we're still pushing damage with the 1k1, we're still summoning out 1-0s, we're beating over our opponents, and then the next turn we establish events and we go from there. So the setup turn at level 1, we can do it with a climax, whereas in the 6 event deck, it's very hard to do that setup turn with a climax. It's just quite difficult. So these are some of the benefits of this deck that I think the early game is just so much better than the 6 climax. Obviously, once the 6 climax deck gets rolling and you get the free refresh every turn, that deck can compress and, you know, start to build a lot of that. Basically, it heals 1 every turn because it free refreshes, and then your deck compression gets reset every single turn. So that deck does have like a higher ceiling in that regard compared to this, where this deck we're gonna have to take refresh damage, we're gonna have to mill naturally and stuff like that. But like, it's so much easier to get off the ground in this deck, and I feel like the ceiling is pretty close because we still get to do double combo for like the entire course of the game. We still get to compress a lot. We still get a lot of resources. So So because of the insane consistency of the early game in this deck, this deck really affords the ability for me to run 4 copies of Yami Makina. And this is kind of the reason why I decided to play Macross in the first place, because I love this card. Yami Makina is such a cool card. And I was basically thinking to myself, what is like the best deck for Yami Makina, best shell? And I tested a bunch of stuff, right? I tested Kaname Door, I tested 8 Door. But then I realized one day in the shower that like I could build this shell with the Kaname Mikumo, the Fly Walkway package. I could have a really solid early game, and then all the extra resources I get from doing this, I can feed it into getting as many Yami Makinas as I can, and I can go into a level 3 game where I can drop 2, 3, or even 4 Yami Makinas on my opponent, rip out 3 to 4 cards from their hand, and then they just don't get to play the game, right? And I was deciding to do this into a meta where hand is really important at level 3, right? If you think about a lot of the best decks, right? Like even like Slime, they're using Murons to search out their finishers, right? If I ripped out their finishers, then it's really hard for them to get extra finishers. They don't really have good ways to like grab their finishers on the final turn. Their finishers don't cantrip or hand fix or anything like that. If you think about the 7 Deadly Sins, right? The Hendrix Sins, they need to be in hand, right? Usually they're in hand and you play them to get other ones. But more importantly, Hendrix Sins climax combo is pay 1, ditch 2. So if I hand rip them twice or 3 times, they literally can't triple Hendrix Sin. Like even from a full hand. 3 hand rips means that they have to hit a brainstorm, or they have to get really, really lucky with triggers in order to be able to triple Hendrickson. They're usually, you basically just knock a Hendrickson out of the equation, even if you don't even hand rip the Hendricksons. So I was thinking like, if those are the best decks in the game, my hand rip is going to be super good, super well situated into those decks. And so I think Yami Makina is like a huge part of how this deck can win, and win from situations where like no other deck is able to like target the hand and disrupt the hand. And yeah, and honestly, out of like I played 6 games of Swiss at Vancouver, 7 games of Swiss in Chicago. This card came up basically in like 75% of my games. And there's games where I literally just played 2 Yami Makina. I ripped out the cards that my opponent needed for the next turn, and they were not able to play the game. Like Yami Makina saved my runs. Like my run could have been way worse because I had such bad luck at both Vancouver and Chicago. But thanks to Yami Makina, like I was able to win out games that I would have otherwise lost. So this is kind of the thesis. This is what I really wanted to bring to the table for Macross. This is where I think Macross has just like something really special. Like no other set can do this kind of stuff, right? This is really, really exciting. All right, so we're gonna round out the deck, obviously, right, to make sure the deck's utility is good. So just pretty straightforward rest of the deck for Macross. 4 copies of the Mikumo 3500. This one is going to be always 3500. It cannot side attack, and then as starting Mohan's attack phase, you can mill the top card of your deck if it's a level 2 or lower character. When they front attack it, you can bounce it back to your hand. It's a really good card that stays on the board pretty often, you know, because it's either 3500 and your opponent can't beat over it, or you just bounce it back or they side it so that you don't get the bounce back, but you still get the +1. And so, you know, moving into level 1, it's really comfortable if we have a few of these and we have the Mikumo. We can just play the Mikumo if we have the, you know, climax condition in the waiting room, and then if we have Econite Borderline in hand, we can just combo with Mikumo +2 of these. Don't even have to like, you know, commit to anything more than that. We get a bunch of resources, and then the next turn we can go into Fly Walkway. So really, really nice. Obviously playing 4 copies of the new face and ace for Mikumo. This one helps us grab the events, helps us mill through the deck. If you think about this card is 1 stock to mill 6, right? So this deck has phenomenal mill, even without like the Rain of Brainstorm making sure that we're refreshing every turn. Like we're really comfortably just being able to mill through our entire deck whenever we want to. So I don't think mill is ever an issue with this deck, and this is one of the this card is like one of the reasons I thought like, yeah, we don't need the Rain of Brainstorm. Like the Rain of Brainstorm is totally not necessary to enjoy the rest of the Fly Walkway package. I'm playing 3 copies of the Riki. I played this at 4 at Vancouver. I cut it down to 3. I think that's the right choice for some extra cards. And then we're playing 3 copies of Scarlet Noble Freya. Now this card is a card that a lot of JP decks don't play in their 6 climax deck list. This is usually not a card that they play. They usually play something else. I think in this deck specifically, this card is super, super strong. not only does this card help us grab specific pieces, but we can use Kaname to summon this out, and then when it's in front row, it can use when something else gets attacked, you can pay 1, send this to waiting room, bounce that back to our hand, so we can use that to recycle the Kaname. It's really, really good in that situation where we have the Kaname combo, we don't have Fly Wakure, and we have Axia like available and stuff like that. Just a great like little synergy package. The second thing that this card is really good is because the on-play effect is pay 1, discard 1, salvage a card from our waiting room. It's really important to help us like get Yami Makinas. We can play like a Yami Makina, play a Freya, grab the Yami Makina back, play the Yami Makina again, rip another card. That kind of pattern is really, really important for this deck. And the last thing is like a lot of times I want this in the back row so that like I can attack 3 times with my characters and then use this to like bounce a card from my board back to my hand, because like this deck plays really, really tight, and so sometimes like I need to use this to get a card back from my board so that I don't have to like use a different card or resource, or like even a Mikumo salvage to grab that card. So like let's say in a matchup where like let's say against Slime, sometimes against Slime I want to hand rip them when they've searched all their Murons and their hand is all Murons. This is not going to be relevant anymore because, you know, the Slime ban list, but previously, let's say they do like Yum Yum Yum, search 3 Murons, their hand is like all Murons, right? I want to be able to hand rip them that turn. So if before they do the Yum 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 turn, if I can do double Kaname into Mikumo, and then use Mikumo to salvage 2 Makinas, I'm ready so that if they search a bunch of their Murons, I can drop 2 Makinas to hand rip their Murons. But then I still need to deal with the Yom board, right? So in that situation, I want the Freya in the back row, so that when they front attack one of my Kanames, I can use the Freya to bounce the Kaname back to my hand. So using the Freya as like a drop salvage for the Kaname that's on board, the Kaname comes back to my hand is still double Makina Kaname because of the Mikumo salvages, and then on the following turn I draw any climax, and then I can do Kaname Mikumo with double hand rip. I kill their board of Yoms, I rip out as many Murons as I can, and like now Slime can't play, right? And I actually did exactly that in one of my games, and Slime actually could not play. It was so much fun, yeah. So this card is really, really important, and like knowing how to play with this card correctly is like pivotal to like playing this deck, right? Like I messed up on one of my plays with this card in Vancouver. I don't think it cost me the game. I think I won still, but like it definitely, I like messed up and I remembered that. So I played a lot better. I played a lot better at Chicago, but I just got unluckier at Chicago, so it is what it is. And then we're playing 3 copies of the Freya new Apple Loving New Face Brainstorm. This is a top check 3 Brainstorm. So we're not playing Reina, we're playing this instead. The top check 3 basically means that if we hit a climax, we're going to mill through 7 cards. So again, deck speed is not an issue. This helps us grab climaxes. Once we get any of our climaxes, it becomes the other climax, you know, when we have the other one in the waiting room. This also helps us mill the climaxes into the waiting room. Just a really fantastic card for the deck. Alright, we are playing 1 copy of the Kaname Witch. This is the On Death. We call it Kome, so top check 3 for a climax. If you add a climax, you have to discard a card. Otherwise, it's just free mill. Pretty important for the one-of because there's some situations where you need to do Kaname, summon this Witch Kaname, crash the Witch Kaname, mill out the rest of your deck if you're in a situation like that. Sometimes we also like play the Kaname, play over her, try to grab a climax. Getting climax is really important in this deck. There's a few games I lost because I just couldn't get climax even with the Kaname, so like we should have this option. It's really good. And the last level 0, I'll play it right here because it's technically a climax combo, but we don't play the standby. So this is addition I added for Chicago that I did not have at Vancouver, and I didn't need it at Vancouver, but I did need it at Chicago. And the reason why I need it at Chicago, this works with the let's do this. These cards are, we'll put these cards together because this is kind of the reason why you're playing these cards. So so this is we call it a field encore. It's when this card, when another character is sent from stage to waiting room, if this is in your back row, yeah, if this is in your backstage, you can send this from waiting room, from stage to waiting room to bring that character back to stage, right? And then so you can use this to save like our Kaname or like our Mikumo in the front row, but usually that's not the case. It's actually better to use the Freya to bounce it back because that gives you a little bit more flexibility and stuff like that. What we use the Makina for really is with this Mikumo. So this Mikumo on play, you can discard a card, salvage a card. Japan really likes this card. They'll run it at 2 copies in the 6 climax deck, which I think makes sense because they don't run this. So this is basically a glorified version of this starting from level 2, right? This deck, you need this earlier, but in the Japanese, in the 6 standby, or 6 standby, I keep saying 6 standby. In the 6 climax list, you don't have the resources to use stock early game. So they just run more of this so that they have the hand fix like late game. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But basically, the second effect of this card is you can send this from stage to waiting room to bounce on your opponent's characters. So if this is in the front row and this is in the back row, you can send this from stage to waiting room, bounce a character, use this, bring this back, and then you can send it from stage to waiting room again to bounce another character. And the second time you bounce, you're not paying the 1, right? Because like when you play it the first time, you're paying the 1, but the second time, because you're bringing it back for free with this, you don't pay the second one, so it saves you a stock if you want to double bounce, which is really, really relevant. I think this deck is like, even though we get a lot of resources once we get online, sometimes, you know, if we don't have enough turns, we can be pretty pressed for resources, and so having the ability to save 1 stock is really, really strong in this deck. And specifically, it's really easy because we can salvage this, and this can get us this. So like, pretty easy to get to both halves of this double bounce combo. I've added this in for Chicago specific for Ichika, because Ichika can do the early plays, and then the early play really counters the Mocha effect. So I really needed double bounce against Ichika specifically. It's also pretty good against Nino and other standby decks, but Ichika was like the matchup where I was really terrified of it, honestly. I didn't play any Ichikas, but like, yeah, if I played an Ichika, like, I really needed this to double bounce 2 of their early plays so they can't just like blank my Mochas. Alright, final few cards. It's going to be 1 copy of the 2/1 Reina. This card's really good because it helps us generate extra stock for playing a bunch of cards, especially with the Yami Makinas. There's going to be turns where we're playing down cards over cards, and if we have the Reina already on board, we basically +1 stock every time we have to play a card over a card. So like, I'll do stuff like play a Yami Makina, tap this, send the Yami Makina stock, play another Yami Makina over that, play another Yami Makina over that, and then play like whatever else I need to play, or like, you know, start the combo. And so I just basically save a stock in that kind of interaction. So this card is pretty good, comes up. Also is a level support, so it gives power to our level 2 and level 3, which is pretty relevant. I'm playing 1 copy of the Mirage counter. I cut the anti-overlevel counter for the Mirage counter. I think Mirage counter just does better. They both like can pay 1 to get rid of a card on board, to deny like reverses and stuff like that, which you can also do with like the Freya. The Freya and the Mirage together basically means that any deck that requires a reverse towards the late game basically just never gets it against us, which is really nice. But a Mirage counter is really good because our finisher isn't really too lethal. Like, obviously if we hit a bunch of climaxes off with the Mocha effect, then like we can punch in for a game, but usually we're getting them pretty close, and so like having a defensive option at level 3, especially if we trigger a choice on final turn, is really nice. So I think Mirage counter is really good. This definitely saved my butt a few times. And then last but not least, we're playing 1 copy of the Yami Freya Music is Insanity. This is going to be the either Fumi or your opponent, so shuffle all cards from their waiting room back into their deck except for 1 climax of their choice, or you can reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a music character, you can burn 1, and or sorry, music or pilot, right? But yeah, so like, this is kind of like an off finisher. It has a 3 soul as well. Also, it can decompress our opponent for those situations where that matters. And then what do you call it? Yeah, because we have this as the decompression, we don't really need the Hayate Freya. Even though the Hayate Freya is a better form of decompression because they shuffle, they have to leave 2 climaxes out instead of 1. This one doesn't require climax, so like, we're still able to keep the 4/4 climax spread, and still have access to all the tools that like the 6 climax deck did. So on the surface, this deck is pretty straightforward, and if you look at it like this, it looks pretty normal, right? This deck looks very normal, but the thought process that came about to building this deck, I think, was really difficult. Like, I didn't magically stumble upon this. Like, we started from, basically I started from 8 door, and I went from 8 door into this after like testing, and like, it's really interesting how the 8 door deck transformed into this 8 choice deck with the events, because the events were like a later addition as I like lapped through this. And then the result is a deck that just looks like the 6 climax deck if you take out the Reina Brainstorms and, you know, fix the climax lineup. So I thought that was really curious. Like, it's really interesting how like this deck evolved. But it didn't start off from like a 6 climax deck, right? It started off from an 8 door deck with 4 Yami Makina, because this deck is built to maximize the effectiveness of the Yami Makina. Alright, last few things I need to talk about is that if you wanted to take this deck to a regional, please do so, by the way. Like, I think this deck is crazy. I think this deck is even better now, post ban list, because Slime was one of your worst matchups, and now, like, it's not a really bad matchup, it's just like a 50-50 matchup, right? Like every Slime matchup really is, but Slime is a lot worse now, and so like, you feel a lot better in the Slime, personally, I think. And so like Slime got easier, right? SDS got hit a bit, but SDS was already a great matchup for me. I never played any SDS, by the way. I feel like if I played SDS, I would have just like, I never played a single SDS in all my tournament runs, so smoj, right? And then the new Quinn stuff, like with this stuff, we're really able to interact with Quinns. And I think overall, Quinn's matchup for this deck is super good. Like, oh man, I lost to an Iski player, but generally speaking, the Iski matchup is super free because we rip cards out of their hand and they can't Iski combo. That game I got super unlucky. I basically, there's like 2 situations where the next card was climax, and if I canceled either of those times, I would have lived and won because my opponent was at 3-6. I just needed 1 more damage, right? But it is what it is. But I mean, the Quinn's matchups are in general, they're super free. Nino is super free because Nino just dies to like double bounce interactions, and then like we just get so much advantage. Nino can't do anything about it, and then we, instead of going for a hand rip against Nino, which doesn't really matter too much, we use all our extra resources. We just double bounce every single turn. We have the hand for it. We just double bounce every single turn, and then Nino can't play. And then Ichiko is like the scariest one, but again, we have double bounce to, you know, negotiate with their early play board. And then the hand rip is going to be relevant against Ichika because Ichika, they're level 3s, they don't, they're healers. So they have to sculpt their level 3s into their hand in order to do everything. So if we hand rip them, if we either hand rip out their level 3s or the level 3 salvage climax, they're like really screwed because it's really difficult for them to get access to the climax without the card that just salvages the climax, right? So hitting either of those with the Makina hand rip is great. So this deck is really well positioned. Like I'm done because I want to judge Pasadena. But like if I wasn't judging Pasadena, I would very likely just take this deck to Pasadena, and I think I would do really well. Like I feel like I've been so close with this deck, right? And locally in my locals, I'm like always X1 or better with this deck. Like this deck is super strong, and I'm just a little bummed out that I wasn't able to perform when it mattered. But like that's just the nature of weiss and card games, right? Like you're never gonna be always successful. It's all about the grind. It's all about having that right mentality. Yeah, okay, so that's the first thing I want to say. I think this deck is crazy good. I think if you were to take this deck to an event, I feel like you would do well once you got to learn it. And you need to practice this deck for sure. Like, it's not an easy deck to play. Get some reps in it. The second thing is, though, if you don't believe in Yami Makina, which I totally understand, because like not everybody believes in like the hand rip. I think this is broken, but if you don't believe in Yami Makina, you can cut this for more utility or the spammable the burn brainstorm, the Yami Reina. It's the 1/0. You can tap 2 characters, pay 1, tap 2 characters to brainstorm 4, and then for each, for all the climaxes you milled, you burn that number. You can play that and some extra utility, and then that's like a more normal list. It'll do better in like a more normal way. Like you'll just win like very normally with that list, right? Your end game is going to be like double, triple Freya with a bunch of burns on top of it that you get from the brainstorms. You can do that. I think that's boring personally, but like it is definitely going to be a more like normal and like consistent deck, right? But then I think like once you start hand ripping people, it's like it's so brutal. Like there's so many, like hand rip is just crazy, I think. So yeah, I think, I don't want to like talk too much about my tournament runs because I feel like it's just gonna sound like I'm complaining about like an alternate universe where I should have topped and stuff like that. But what happened at Vancouver, I'm the most bummed out about Vancouver because in Chicago I played well, but I just got unfortunate, right? Like, it's just like I couldn't win when it mattered. In Vancouver, I did not play well. So what happened in Vancouver, and I will share this story so that you guys can learn how to play this deck, was that in practice, I had determined, right, that if I opened any events in my opening hand, I should mulligan them. The reason why you should mulligan events in this deck, and maybe not in the 6 climax deck as much, but in this deck is because when we discard the events, we're going to be able to draw into more playable cards, which is going to be helpful for early game, but also the Freya Mikimo is going to be able to salvage the events more consistently if once we discard them. And then the objective of this deck is not to play 2 events when you hit 1, because again, without the brainstorm and stuff like that, we're not pressured to get the events online as soon as possible. We just want to make sure our early game is consistent and good. And so the first 2 rounds I played in Vancouver, for some reason, I lost my mind and I forgot to discard the events in Mulligan. So in round 2, I kept 1 event in Mulligan, and in round 3, I kept 2 events in Mulligan. In round 2, the keeping the event in Mulligan did mess up my early game a little bit, but I was able to bring it back for the most part. And it really just came down to like, it was like a last card swing situation where he was really uncompressed because I Fumio'd him. He was very likely to take damage, but he canceled. It is what it is. In round 3, I was playing against Chainsaw Man. I kept 2 events, and I did not draw a card that was level 1 or lower for 3 turns. I had 1-0, it was this one. And it was the only card I attacked with for 3 turns. I hit level 1, my hand was 2s, the events, and climaxes. The only time I attacked more than twice was when I was already level 3. Like the game was, I was not able to play the game. It was so bad. Like if I even drew like Yami Makinas, I would have played them because I had some stock just to get some extra attacks. But no, I couldn't. I couldn't even do that. And I almost brought it back because my opponent did some misplays, and then I like, you know, I like locked in and tried my best. But then after that game, I was like, wait, why did I keep the events in Mulligan? Like, why did I do that? Like, that's actually so dumb. Like, I practiced this. I practiced not keeping the events in Mulligan. Like, for some reason on that day, I just like lost my mind in the first 2 rounds. I forgot to do that. And then, you know, after that, I just went on like a 4-game win streak. And I had the buy card, but unfortunately, you know, I wasn't in top. But like, that was such an unfortunate game. And I feel like if I had any semblance of like, just like the mind to like awareness to mulligan my events, I would have just not had that problem in that game. And that was the game that mattered to like for me, right? You know, so like it's really sad. I'm really bummed out that like I practiced so much and I just like messed up, you know, on the day. But it is what it is. But for you guys watching this video, if you ever want to try this deck, just know that you should never keep these events in your opening hand. If you draw them afterwards, it's fine, right? But like in opening hand, you want to be mulliganing the events. Well, actually, let's talk about mulligan, because mulligan in this deck is really interesting. So, I mulligan events for sure. But climaxes, I'm actually more hesitant to mulligan because of the Mikumo early play condition requires 2 or less climaxes. So if you ditch too many climaxes, you sometimes get into a situation where you hit level 1, and it would be great if you could play the Mikumo, but because you discard too many climaxes, you actually can't play the Mikumo. So I'm actually more okay with holding climaxes than events because of the Mikumo. And then between the Mikumo and the Kaname, I am more likely to discard Kaname and hold the Mikumo, right? Because again, we do need 1 Kaname in waiting room for the combo, but like the Mikumo, if we can hold it in hand and play it from hand, that's like super big, right? So generally speaking, if I don't have level 0s, I'm just gonna mulligan as much as I can to get level 0s. You need level 0s to attack with, like that's the most important thing, right? But then once you have like a level 0, like a pretty good, like either like this Mikumo 35 or like some good attackers, like any of these like decent attackers, I would keep all the climaxes, or I would keep how do I say it, 1 of each climax. So if I like open 1 Axia, 1 Forbidden Borderline, Mikumo, and like an event, I would like discard the event and like whatever else. I would keep this and 1 of each climax. Because it's really good. That way, like once we hit level 1, depending on what we have in our hand and what we have access to, we can go for either climax combo. And then on the following turn, because the other climax is in the waiting room, and we can get our events online and then play the other climax, and now we have both, right? So that's like the ideal. If I open 2 of these climaxes, or 2 of the same name climaxes in opening hand, I'm willing to ditch 1, right? Because again, double name is pretty redundant in hand. So I'm okay with like ditching 1 at that point. But that's only if I have 0s, right? If I don't have any 0s, then of course I'm going to ditch a lot of cards to try to draw playable 0s, because like even if we ditch 5, sometimes we can draw into a bunch of like unplayable events or like the 1/1s and stuff like that, and we just don't want our hand to be like that. Our 0 count is pretty decent. It's was it 14, 18, 19? So it's not like low 0 count, but like, you know, 19 0s is still like, you still need to be mulliganing kind of aggressively for level 0s. So that's kind of like my mulligan strategy for the most part. But like, I guess like the rule of thumb is like hold more climaxes than you're used to or you're comfortable with, because like it's important to not have climaxes in the waiting room for the Mikumo early play condition. Just generally speaking, I keep up to 1 of each in opening hand. I'm usually really comfortable with that. And then ditch events, ditch this 1-0 because you need at least 1 in waiting room, so there's no point holding it. And then just try to get like your good level 0s to start with. Alright, yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I really do hope you guys give this deck a try, because this deck is just really cool. It's a very special deck, and I worked really hard on it. And I think, unfortunately, I wasn't able to see like the fruits of my labors, but like I hope that you guys can, and that'd be really awesome. So let me know if you guys tried this deck out, like how it goes for you. If you have any other questions too about this deck, please let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to help you out with like getting to understand this deck. But this deck is so much fun. It's so cool, and yeah, I just really hope you guys give it a shot. And honestly, I think Japan kind of slept on this. They kind of missed the mark, you know. Like I never saw this come out of Japan. I think Japan missed out on a really crazy deck. Like I think this is kind of crazy, and like, yeah, it's who's to know? Maybe I've discovered something good. Maybe it was just maybe not, right? Like who knows? It's hard to say, but at least in the world that we live in, this deck, even though it did not perform to my expectations, I think is still there's still opportunities and possibilities. Alright, so that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll have some more deck profiles upcoming because I have a bunch of decks like in line, and hopefully I have a bit more time to make these. But well, I'll see you guys on the next one then. Bye bye.